Hey everyone, this is Mike, and today I wanted to talk about a relatively controversial topic, which is should healers do DPS, yes or no? In my opinion, yes, but also hear me out as to why that would be, and why you would also want to do DPS as a healer. So, first of all, when it comes down to healing in this game, I think a lot of it comes down to experience when you're looking at doing more damage. When I started out healing in this game, this was also my first MMO, so I'd never healed before in any kind of scenario before this. I started playing as Astro because it started out as level 30. I went into leveling Roulette, which was was it like 1000 Miles of Total Rock? I don't know what it's called. Basically, the dungeon with all the spiders and the slime on the floor that slows you down. But I was very scared, I guess you could call it. I wasn't confident enough that I would keep my tank alive. So what I did was I just looked at my tank's HP, or the rest of my party if it's in like a boss scenario where they're taking damage as well. And as soon as they took damage, I would start healing to make sure they didn't die. Now, of course, as I progressed through the dungeon, I very quickly found out that I don't constantly have to be keeping a look at my tank, and that one healer GCD that I spend on my tank will also go a long way when it comes to healing him up. So what I did eventually was, in between all of my healing GCDs, I would start to cast a Malefic here, a Malefic there, maybe apply my dot here or there on a boss fight as well, until eventually what you're seeing right now in the background is I am basically doing very little healing and a whole lot of DPS. Now, of course, doing this is something that you have to get used to. Like, you have to find out and get used to how much damage is my tank going to take, how much healing is required in a certain scenario, and then eventually the damage will come on itself. And that is because I like to look at one very basic concept in this game, which is doing your ABCs, or always be casting. And if you know that you don't have to always be casting your heals every time that you're not healing, try to spend some GCDs on doing some damage. And this will actually help you go quite a long way, not only in dungeons, but more specifically in like Savage Raids, Extreme Primals, and eventually Ultimate, if that is something that you want to tackle as well. Because right there, in Savage Raids and Ultimate, healer DPS becomes increasingly more important to have as well to meet that enrage, because in a dungeon you don't have an enrage, so technically you can get away with doing 0 DPS as a healer and still clearing the fight, like, or just clearing the dungeon just fine. It just means that it will take a whole lot longer than if you were actively DPSing, because a healer in a DPS, a healer in a dungeon can actually provide a hell of a lot of damage. So much so that you're like doing more damage than the actual tank at some points, like especially White Mage. White Mage is really strong in dungeons, and not only because of the damage it provides, but for example Holy is the strongest in dungeons as well out of all of the 3 healers, because Holy stuns, and the stun lasts about for 10 seconds if you're spamming it. So during those 10 seconds your tank is going to be taking virtually no damage, so technically you're even preventing damage to your tank by doing damage with that Holy spell. Of course the other 2 healers don't have that, but then on the other hand, when you are bursting down mob packs, you're still going to make it so that by the time that your tank runs out of cooldowns and thus becomes a whole lot more squishy, most of the mobs are going to be dead, or at least close to dead, so that you're not going to have to spam heal your tank to make sure that they stay alive, because that is something that will happen when the DPS of your party in total isn't high enough. Mobs are going to still be alive, and then you're going to have to try and spam heal your tank to make sure that they stay alive. So those are more stressful scenarios, I guess you could say, and that is why healer DPS is something that you kind of want to do, because then those scenarios won't happen as often, or they won't last as long. And then of course when it comes down to Trials, Savage Raids and Ultimate, that is where healer DPS becomes more and more important. Now of course it's not just your healers doing damage, it's also the rest of your party that needs to do the respectable amount. But of course we're just talking about healers here. And that is that these types of content have an enrage, and if there is an enrage, it means that every single piece of damage that is extra contributed that wouldn't be there is highly appreciated, because it means that you have a lesser chance of hitting enrage when things go south. For example, if a DPS ends up dying, or a tank dies, or something else like a damage down, something like that. Like for example on Titan, if you walk into the bombs, you get damage down. So those are the things that normally shouldn't be there, so meaning that those people are going to be doing less damage because of the weakness, because of the damage down, and because of that your healer DPS is going to help contribute to meeting that DPS check in the end. And it's also not like in some other fights where healer DPS is very low. On the contrary, healer DPS is extremely high in this fight. For example, when we take a look at White Mage, in I think our last week's clear, our White Mage was pulling insane numbers, especially during like the first two phases, compared to like me and my co-tank. Like she was on our heels when it came down to DPS. So healer DPS is very high when you want it to be. Of course, you can't always play super optimal because, for example, when it comes down to me healing in like Savage raids, I always play in Party Finder, meaning that I play super safe to make sure that the party survives because I don't know what my co-healer is going to be doing. So, of course, a lot of like optimizing healer DPS comes from playing in a static or playing with a co-healer so that you know what they're going to be doing. But when it comes down to Party Finder, of course, play it safe. I'm of course not saying that you should make it so that there is a risk of your party dying or that you're gonna greed for that one extra healing DPS GCD or healer DPS GCD rather than healing up the party to make sure that they stay alive. I'm not saying that at all, but I am saying that take this concept of always be casting and apply it to your gameplay. Make sure that you're not just standing around doing nothing, unless of course you run out of mana, like for example if you have to res a lot of people and your mana is really low. Stand around, wait for your mana to come back to make sure that you still have mana to heal if it's needed. But in a normal scenario where you don't have very little mana because you've constantly been resing people, then you have enough mana to also do damage when you're not healing. So take this always be casting principle and apply that to your gameplay so that when you're not healing the tank or the rest of the party, do some DPS, because you'll actually find out that there are very little instances in this fight where a lot of this game where a crazy amount of healing is required of you, and for the most part you'll be able to actually do a whole lot more damage GCDs than you actually need to do healing GCDs. And of course a lot of healers, especially now at level 80, also have a bunch of off-global cooldown utility when it comes down to providing healing, meaning that they can use a lot more GCDs on actual damage instead of having to use them on healing. But even if you're not doing that, like for example, when I put out the Nocturnal Astro video, it was the first time I played Astro in like any endgame fight really, from my time playing this game. So I was very inexperienced on it. I didn't make good use of any of my tools really when it comes down to my off-global cooldowns, meaning that I used way more healing than I should have. But even then, I still made sure that every time I wasn't healing, I was pressing that Malefic button, I was making sure that my dot was on the boss, and that goes a long way, especially in those extreme primals or those savage raids, because that's where all of the DPS that you can get is going to highly contribute to meeting that DPS check. So that's why you kind of want to heal as a healer, not only because it contributes to the damage, but it also doesn't make you look bad. For example, if I'm in a dungeon and I see my healer just stand AFK next to me while me and the two other guys are trying to do our best DPSing the mob hack, then I get kind of disheartened. It's like, why are we trying so hard, or why are we even trying to kill the mob hack when you're just standing there doing nothing, maybe casting a heal once every 5 to 10 seconds when the tank finally does drop low. So in that kind of scenario, always be casting, use your heals, make sure the party doesn't die, but when you're not healing, there is plenty of time for you to also do some DPS. So that is my stance on the kind of healer DPS question, I guess you could say. In my opinion, yes, you should do damage whenever possible. No, you shouldn't jeopardize the safety of your party to do so. But even if you are playing it super safe and you're making sure that nobody's going to die, there is still a lot of time for you to put in some damage as well. So that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to ask me some questions or something in the comments, feel free to leave them there as well. I'll make sure to read them. And I'll see you in the next one.